I'm gonna keep this water up here because this is gonna be a doozy. You know, I wanted to be a jockey. Following Ramon Dominguez is pretty amazing. What a good man. Problem is I weigh over 200 pounds, and that dream died a long time ago. Dan called me to come up here and speak about a very serious tragedy. Last December, as most of you know, the Lilac fire hit San Luis Rey Downs in Bonsall, California. I've started this speech about 1,000 times in my mind, and I never kind of get through this part, so I'm really happy that I've actually not cried yet. We had 8 horses down there. Our trainer, Phil D'Amato, had about 40 horses down at San Luis Rey. So if you've ever been to San Luis Rey, it's a beautiful little training center. It's really serene. A lot of trainers like to put young 2-year-olds down there. And you never thought something like this could happen. In California, we have earthquakes and fires, right? The rest of the country has hurricanes, and we've seen that recently and how tragic it can be. But fires are really, really scary, probably for everybody here. And I had never experienced being in a fire, and I wasn't there. I was home. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on December 7th, 2017. And we were watching the news. It was really dry and really hot, and we suspected there was fires, and there was fires near San Luis Rey. And I got a call from Phil, our trainer, D'Amato, and he said, "Hey, I'm going down there. I don't think it's going to get to San Luis Rey, but I'm going to go down there. They've said there's a chance that it could hit San Luis Rey." And I said to him, "Please save Oddsmaker." Now, we had 8 horses down there, and I'm not supposed to have favorites, but Oddsmaker was different. Oddsmaker was purchased for part of our pin hooking operation, and our pin hooking operation is when you buy and then you sell. So you buy a yearling and then you sell that yearling as a 2-year-old the following spring. And my very good friend and comrade, Tom McCrocklin, bought Oddsmaker for $10,000, which, as most of you know, is not necessarily an expensive purchase. But he showed great promise leading up to the 2-year-old sales. And when he got there, I had never met him before, and I remember the first time I saw him, he was little. We had this big white blaze on his face, and he had breezed really well. And I nicknamed him Speedy. And I would tell all the people who came and see him, because at these 2-year-old sales, people would come and they want to buy him. So they'd lead him out, and I'd introduce him as Speedy. And he just had this character and this spark and this spunk. And obviously you can tell I love horses a little bit, like some of you. I see you smiling. And he had a lot of attention. He had all this attention. We thought he was going to be this big sale for us and go on to a great career, hopefully for someone else. That's what we do. That's our job. Well, it turns out he had this little spur on his knee, they said. The vet said he had a spur, and when a horse has a vetting issue, sometimes they don't sell as well as you would like them to sell. When he went through the ring, there was a bid for 30 grand. And I was standing about 10 feet away from the guy who raised his hand, and I'm not supposed to be bidding, but I raised my hand, and I bought him back for $35,000. Oh, I got hell. None of my people were happy. "Why didn't you sell him? Just get rid of him?" I said, I don't know, I got a feeling this horse is going to be special. So we took him back, and the first thing we did was we wanted to take the spur out. So we sent him over to the clinic right in Ocala, and the vets went in, and it turns out it was just a defect. It wasn't even a spur. They cleaned him up a little bit, but it was not a big deal at all. In fact, the vet told me if I was standing next to him, he would have just closed it up and not done anything. Ultimately, he comes to San Luis Rey and goes into training with Phil, and Speedy was Speedy. He was awesome. I would drive up to see him breeze on the weekends, and he just carried himself differently. He would bow his neck, and he just would breeze. Ramon knows, sometimes you can just tell, right, when you have a special horse. So that's why I said to Phil, just tell me it's not Oddsmaker. Just save him. I remember about 2 hours later, I got another call from Phil. And his, kind of like my voice right now, his voice was shaking. And he said, it's really bad. And I said, what do you mean? I'll never forget this. He was shaking and crying. If you know Phil, Phil's normally very calm, and he said, it's apocalyptic. That was the phrase he used, apocalyptic. And apparently what had happened was they had these palm trees, and the palm trees, the tips of them caught on fire. Pop, pop. They made these little explosions. And it would go from one palm tree to the other palm tree to the other palm tree. The fire, they said, once it jumped the freeway, got to San Luis Rey in 7 minutes. There were 425 horses on the grounds. The freeways and the roads going into San Luis Rey were blocked because they needed to get the humans out. And I understand that, and I respect that. And no one's saying at this point or any point that there was anything else they could possibly do. But the real heroes that day were the people at San Luis Rey. The grooms, the assistant trainers, people like Martine Belloc, who was in her stall trying to get her horses out. The fires rampaged these older barns. And a lot of horses, they didn't want to leave their stall. Most of the trainers down there, what they did was they just said, turn them loose. Now, normally, for you racing fans out there, turn them loose is a good thing, right? Right, Ramon? We want them to turn them loose at the quarter pole. In this case, we turned them loose and just let the horses run wild all over San Luis Rey. A lot of them went to the track and just ran and ran and ran while these fires were burning. In fact, one of the things that kind of saved me a little bit was that in one of the videos, many of you probably saw it, there were those videos of the horses going by, and I was going to show it today, but decided not to. There's a big gray horse that was leading the charge of these horses, and that was Tony Blackjack. That was one of our horses, and good old Tony made it out okay. Oddsmaker didn't. He was one of the 46 horses. And I talked to Dr. Mano, afterwards, and I said, what happened? I said, how did this happen? He said, some of the horses, and they were running and running and running, they became exhausted. They became completely dehydrated. They had smoke inhalation, breathing in all the smoke. And they just tied up. I don't know if you've ever heard of a horse tying up, but it's like a giant body cramp. We complain when our hamstring or our calf gets a cramp. So they just kind of go into shock. And Dr. Mano sat with Oddsmaker for 2 hours trying to give him fluids and save him, and he couldn't. We lost another beautiful horse named Riri that day too. Awesome 3-year-old filly by Speightstown. And you start feeling sorry for yourself. You want to say, why me? Why did this happen? And all these emotions start coming over you. So we took off. I grabbed my sister, and we took off and drove down there that night because we had other horses that were missing. And it wasn't just us. I mean, Pete Miller had, his whole barn there was missing. We didn't know where these horses were. Had no idea. Drove down to Del Mar, got there in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden when you get there, there's all these people lined up, handing out water, blankets, buckets, socks, clothes. It was absolutely an incredible scene. And all these horses are being trailered in on every kind of trailer you could possibly imagine. And we go into there and we start literally looking for your horses. And there are people running around, and thankfully with texting, and you're texting this person, oh, hey, I think this horse is yours. What does your horse look like? I have a chestnut with a big white blaze. If you see him, it was truly, truly surreal. They started putting some of our horses that they found, Tony Blackjack, one of them, thankfully, and we found another filly named Taurine Dancer. And when I went and saw her, her eyelashes were fully singed, her nose was totally burned, backside was burned. It was horrible. It was literally the most horrific experience I think I've ever had. And you're just constantly seeing other people, and you're so thankful that you found the horse, but there's still others that are out there. And then you're thinking to yourself, how did these horses even get here? Those were the heroes. The people that cared so much about other people's horses and just their well-being. Got very little sleep that night, ended up going out to Trifecta Farms in the morning, which is an amazing facility, and they did an amazing job. And we still had our list that we were looking for, and some of the other trainers were there. Pete was there. And there's a field of 30, 35, 40 horses with no marks, no way to identify them. The only thing we're looking at, we're literally catching the horse, pulling up the tattoo, calling one of our friends and saying, hey, go to the Jockey Club website and here's the tattoo number. Who is this? And then we'd find out, and then we'd call that trainer, and they would break down and feel fortunate that their horse was found. Phil and I jumped in a car. They said, oh, we have a gray horse over, I don't even remember the farm's name, and I apologize to them, but got in his truck. We're driving through the hills of Bonsall to this like little tiny place, farm, nothing. And I remember looking out, and I see this little gray horse, and he still has his front bandages on, but they're crusty and burnt. And it was one of our horses named Kopitar. And I'll never forget, I ran up to him, and I'm like, oh my God, you made it. And that feeling, but there was one other person. There was two other people there. There was a woman there I had never met, didn't own racehorses, had a dumpy little trailer, and she had gone to San Luis Rey in the fire and grabbed this horse, who she didn't know, and just took it to her place. Gave him water, took care of him till we found him. Later that afternoon, we took my sister and Phil and Matt Nakatani was there. And we drove up to this, we heard that this other place had horses. This just, again, didn't know it's up there. We had an address. I think they have horses up there. And we're driving through, and the fires are still going on. They're little, but you see how much ground was burnt. And we get to this place, and there's another guy, and he's got like 4 or 5 little stalls, call it. And there's a bunch of horses there, and Phil had a couple, and I'll never forget this. We're looking at the tattoos, and there was one horse, I don't know why I remember it, but it was Banzeo Aneste. It was a Pete Miller horse, and I remember texting Pete, we found this horse. And Pete was like, oh, thank you. And then we had to get him back. But it wasn't just the horses. The one thing that a lot of people don't realize is there's people who lived at San Luis Rey Downs, these grooms, these hot walkers. Our assistant trainer there was Linda Thrash, and I remember seeing her the next morning, and she had just burn marks all over her arms. She was bleeding, and she never stopped. She saved as many horses as she could. These people who were there rescuing these horses, putting them on trailers. We offered to pay the one guy. We said, hey, what can we do? And he said, oh, don't worry about it. But getting back, there were grooms. People living there that lost everything. Shoes, none. Socks, none. Toothbrushes, nothing. TV, nothing. Everything gone. And what happened is the real heroes were the people who started making donations and started bringing things. The next couple of days, Delmar, thankfully, and thanks to Delmar, opened their backstretch area. And people just started delivering truckloads of goods. Food, water, TVs, VCRs, a toaster, giant things of socks. I never knew socks were so important. I didn't even wear socks. But there were a lot of socks. And I think that's what you finally realized. That this event, although so tragic and so horrific and so terrible, it brought a community together. It brought our racing community together. And I think in order for this sport to survive, that's what needs to happen. That not just in times of tragedy, but all the time, we need to work together to take care of these horses, to take care of these people that work tirelessly on the backstretch, and to continue to do so until our great sport rises again. That's my story. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.